Here we are, part 3, analyzing themes in qualitative research. Today we're going to talk about measurement. So let's look at the levels of measurement. And again, you have the two types of research that we're going to talk about that primarily exist are quantitative and qualitative. And we're going to look at some differences here because it's going to help us to identify some things moving forward. We've talked about variables. You guys have listened to me talk about this. You've read about it. Qualitative, typically nominal variables, ordinal variables. Again, your names, religions, occupations, ethnic groups. Statistics as a nominal variables are qualitative because they do not involve quantities. We can certainly make them quantifiable by grouping them or assigning a number to them. Ordinal, a rank order, you have high, medium, low. You have agree, you have a disagree. And so we have those types of Likert type things that we get from the different surveys that we might give. Where quantitative, we have interval variables, which are mutually exclusive. Rank order, distance between the variables is very, very meaningful. So the difference in first and second is very important. We talk about income, temperature, the number of times you're married, the number of years you're married, the distance to the nearest school, etc. Again, all those responses are numerical responses. When we compare variables, we have a couple ways we do it. We can do a pairwise comparison. We can describe the similarity between two rows of a table. And we can compare the performance from any two rows, okay? So you have n, remember n is the sample size. So n minus 1 divided by 2 is the number of comparisons. Within group comparisons, we have intra comparisons. Intra, remember I-N-T-R-A, not I-N-T-E-R. That's when we want to compare more than 2 at a time, and it involves scanning multiple rows simultaneously and searching for things like the distribution, and we'll get into that. Cross-group comparison, we have inter-group comparison of components within the group. Okay, some of you right now are thinking, well, I don't know what he's talking about. Again, keep reading the book, especially the research experience book. We have inductive versus deductive theory. Inductive research looks for patterns from observations and development of explanations. Theories, okay, we look for patterns of a series of hypotheses. The hypotheses are retested over and over until that theoretical saturation occurs. We induce, we think this is going to happen. Deductive research starts with the theory, starts with the common sense, the observational literature, derives the hypothesis, moves on to the observations. So in one, we basically gather all the stuff and then we form the observation, or we form the hypothesis and then test it and retest it. Where deductive, we basically start with the theory and then we move forward because we're either going to confirm or deny. Inductive research is required in the exploratory phase of any research process because you have to start thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? Deductive research is required in the confirmation phase of any research project. It doesn't matter whether it's quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods. You're going to think about what can I do? What's out there? What have I seen? What interests me? What do I think is interesting? And I think that's a key word. What do you find interesting about the world around you? And then once you figure that out, then you start to pull together and you start to find things. Well, you know, I see a statement that mustard is always yellow and it will stain your clothes. Well, maybe I want to investigate that. Maybe we can figure out a way that mustard doesn't stain your clothes. I don't know. One of the ways we do this is grounded theory. This is Glaser and Strauss, 1967. And again, a lot of these references are really old because I want you to get as original as you can. A lot of the things that we do, while it can be traced back further, a lot of the real hallmarks of these processes and these theories are, you know, they're not that old. We want to discover theories, causal explanations, grounded in empirical data. We want to look at how things work. We want to look at data for grounded theory. It's going to come from in-depth interviews about experiences, the social processes that shape those experiences. Your focus is on the person and not on what the person thinks. And I want to explain that. So what are they talking about? How are they presenting the information? How are they reacting? You're asking the types of questions where you're asking their opinion, but you don't let them just wander off. I mean, it's very direct questioning. The information that you're looking for, that they're going to give you more than what you're looking for, and all that extra stuff, you honestly can just delete it off your sheet. You don't need it anymore. Now, that was a very short one. But again, I think it's important to look at the differences as we get ready to present content analysis and we get ready to start doing some examples with integrator reliability as you get ready to do your homework. So take a break. Be back in just a moment.